Before Blonde Redhead became the band we know today, elegant, atmospheric, and hauntingly beautiful, they were loud, raw, and caught between chaos and melody. In 1995, their second album, Mia Vita Violenta, marked the moment they began to transform. It's an album born out of tension between noise and beauty, between intimacy and confrontation, even between band members themselves. Recorded on a shoestring budget in New York City, it carried the scars of breakups, sleepless nights, and artistic obsession, but it also revealed glimpses of the band's future brilliance. It's time to uncover the story of how La Mia Vita Violenta was written and recorded, the inspirations behind its name, the struggles that shaped its songs, and why it's such a defining record in Blonde Redhead's history. Hi, I'm Andy Fenstermaker, host of Poetic Wax, a weekly music history series where I dig into the record collection I've been building since the 1990s to explore the history of a band, album, or song from within. Blonde Redhead's story begins in the early 1990s when three outsiders converged on New York City. Milan-born twins Amadeo and Simone Pace had already devoted themselves to music, first as jazz and Latin musicians, then as improvisers navigating the downtown scene. Kyoto-born Kazu Makino arrived with a background in classical music, film studies, and photography. None of them had grown up inside the indie rock culture that was then reshaping Manhattan. As Kazu later recalled, quote, "The New York scene was kind of an American slacker thing, and we were way too eager and way too European. We couldn't pull that off at all. And because we kept being rejected over and over by the scene." Yet rejection only fueled their desire to carve out their own space. The trio was as much defined by tension as by harmony. Simone's drumming carried the rhythms of Brazilian music. Amadeo pursued abstract tunings that pushed his guitar to the breaking point, while Kazu taught herself to scream in front of a mirror, testing how far her voice could stretch without disappearing. They drew inspiration from everywhere: jazz standards, Italian pop, experimental cinema, and the sheer volume of My Bloody Valentine. Their live shows in those years were pitched battles of noise and intimacy, chaotic but strangely elegant. By 1994, they had released their debut on Steve Shelley's Smells Like Records. That first album, raw and jagged, established them as a band of uncompromising energy, but it was the follow-up, La Mia Vita Violenta, that would reveal a deeper layer: yearning for beauty. Reflecting years later, Amadeo described the change. Quote, "We were coming from a more noisy world, and with this record, I think we were trying to figure out who we were and how to find the beauty in the music we wanted to express." That's Amadeo Pace speaking in a memory shared from the album on Instagram recently, right around its 30th anniversary. The shift was not a rejection of noise, but an attempt to balance it with melody and emotion. Kazu, Amadeo, and Simone were learning how to let vulnerability creep into the walls of distortion. The result was a record that sounded less like imitation of their downtown peers and more like their own strange alchemy: romantic one moment, abrasive the next. From their Canal Street apartment, the songs took shape in fragments: guitar riffs, drum beats, perhaps a melody on a 4-track recorder, even snippets recorded on an answering machine. These weren't polished demos, they were raw, urgent explorations of sound and emotion, sketches of what Blonde Redhead might become. La Mia Vita Violenta, or My Violent Life in Italian, hints at transformation of struggle and beauty. The album's title came from Pier Paolo Pasolini's 1959 novel Una Vita Violenta, or A Violent Life, set in the harsh outskirts of post-war Rome. Pasolini's story of poverty, violence, and fleeting moments of beauty resonated with the band's sense of tension and release. But there was also a more personal origin. After the sessions, Kazu traveled to Capri, an ancient island near Naples. Looking back on what they had created, she was overwhelmed. Quote, "Every time I would think about that record, I would start crying. I knew we had made something quite incredible." To mark the moment, she gave Amadeo and Simone matching necklaces inscribed with their names on one side and La Mia Vita Violenta on the other. What began as a literary reference became a talisman, a phrase that captured both their struggle and their sense of triumph. By By 1995, Blonde Redhead were already carrying the scars of touring and fractured relationships. Amadeo and Kazu had split romantically, and Ame filled the time by writing many of the songs that would become La Mia Vita Violenta, sketching them out on a 4-track in his bedroom. Goddard and Pasolini were big influences how they used sound, voices, and dialogue, the music, and the whispering. The band had little money for studio time, but they scrapped together funds, including leftover money from a video commission by Gut Records. They booked late-night sessions at the Magic Shop in Lower Manhattan. Quote, "So we would just crawl in there like cockroaches and have all of our stuff out by morning," Kazu would recall. Despite the beauty in their songs, Kazu admitted that they felt compelled to rough them up in the studio. Quote, "We had written an album dripping with beauty and romanticism, but felt we had to hide it or cover it up with distortion and screaming. We just destroyed it, and that was our process back then." End quote. The sessions carried a heavy toll. "La Mia Vita Violenta took a lot out of me," Kazu later said. "I'm just screaming through that entire album, basically, so I was quite beaten." Amidst the exhaustion, there were flashes of humor and strangeness too, like a sitar player they discovered performing in an East Village restaurant. More on that one in just a second. In the end, the sessions were a crucible. Limited money, strained relationships, late night hours, but from it all stemmed a record that reflected who they were becoming. The sound of La Mia Vita Violenta is both harsh and tender. Noise and melody clash constantly, producing songs that feel torn between abrasion and longing. Critics at the time often leaned on comparisons to Sonic Youth, pointing to alternate tunings and bursts of distortion, but Amadeo and Kazu were quick to resist the label. Quote, "It got to the point where we were getting really fed up with the Sonic Youth comparisons," Amadeo would admit. For Kazu, the band's true inspiration came less from New York's no-wave lineage than from Washington, D.C.'s punk scene. Bands like Fugazi and Unwound. At its heart, the album was not about copying anyone. It was about transformation, about creating a romantic appeal out of chaos. One listener described the record as unusually romantic for its rawness, and the band themselves seemed to agree. Beneath the feedback, you can hear fragments of intimacy, vulnerability, and even beauty breaking through. The songs themselves reveal this duality. I Am There While You Choke on Me is one of the album's most confrontational pieces. The title alone suggests suffocation, intimacy turned hostile, and the music mirrors that sense of being trapped. Guitars grind against each other, creating a claustrophobic wall of sound, while Kazu screams. You can hear what she later described as the process of destroying beauty with distortion. The song feels like an exorcism of the band's inner tensions, the sound of relationships and identities colliding in a small, overheated space. Amadeo and Kazu had just ended their relationship, and the song bristles with that unresolved tension. Then there's UFO, one of the album's most memorable tracks, and it captures the band's fascination with surreal imagery and raw immediacy. Built on jagged guitar riffs and Simone's driving polyrhythmic drumming, it feels both chaotic and strangely playful. The vocals cut through with an eerie mix of detachment and urgency, as if broadcasting from another world. The song's fractured structure mirrors its theme: alienation, otherness, and the strange beauty of the unknown. Harmony stands out as one of the band's most unusual recordings from this period. Midway through, a sitar enters, again played by that street musician I mentioned earlier the band had spotted in an East Village restaurant. Kazu recalled how he arrived at the studio, opened his case, and a cockroach crawled out, only for his performance to fit perfectly into the song's jagged groove. That unexpected texture transforms Harmony into something both chaotic and strangely luminous. Violent Life, somewhat of a title track, is a condensed version of the album's entire ethos, beauty buried beneath distortion, melodies clawing their way through feedback. Simone's drumming is especially prominent here, his counter rhythms acting like a second melody pushing and pulling against the guitars. It's honestly one of my favorites. 10 Feet High revisits the band's love of repetition and contrast. The song alternates between atmospheric passages and bursts of volume, recalling their improvisational roots while pointing towards a more structured future. It feels like a snapshot of a band caught between the rawness of their past and the refinement to come. Throughout the record, as I mentioned, Simone often extends songs with drum codas as if adding footnotes to the music. They layer in small bursts of commentary after the rest of the band has already fallen silent. These moments underline how La Mia Vita Violenta is a document of three musicians still learning how to balance their instincts, leaving traces of unfinished thoughts in the music itself. It's this volatility that gives the album its lasting intensity, the sense that every track teeters between collapse and transcendence. Before we wrap up, I want to just drop one more little thing. Transcripts of these episodes, along with images from my collection and sounds that you can listen to from songs that I talk about, can be read, seen, and heard over on my Substack. Sign up for free today at poeticwax.substack.com. Also, a huge thank you to some of my paid subscribers. For just $2 a month, you can get early access to new videos, members-only videos, and much, much more. The record was released in September of 1995, still on Smells Like Records. It built on the blunt foundation of their debut, but pointed to what was possible, a band that could move beyond noise into something expansive. Reception was mixed in critical circles. Some praised the emotional intensities, others found the tension difficult, the vocals too harsh. But for many fans, myself included, La Mia Vita Violenta became the record where you first heard Blonde Redhead become more than just a noisy experiment. It hinted that melody, atmosphere, and texture would become as important as power and distortion. At first, many shows were under-promoted, leaving the band to play basements where just a handful of puzzled faces stared back. Yet, momentum slowly built. By late 1995, they were sharing stages with Fugazi, Unwound, The Makeup. Kazu recalled the warmth of the DC scene, describing it, quote, like jumping in with a herd of dolphins instead of humans. Still, the album took its toll, but it also became a defining point of pride. Simone later said, quote, "It's my favorite record. The songs are so beautiful. It's the one record of ours that I could listen to forever." Their growing attention eventually pulled them toward Touch and Go Records, where they would release Fake Can Be Just As Good in 1997. By then, the lessons of La Mia Vita Violenta had carried them forward. How to endure strain, how to channel beauty through noise, how to survive as outsiders in the New York scene. Over time, the album has been recognized as crucial to their trajectory. When Masculine Feminine was released in 2016, compiling both Blonde Redhead and La Mia Vita Violenta, plus demos and essays, there was a renewed interest in how these early records shaped what the band would become. Elements of this story were taken from the liner notes within, as well as from other sources around the web. So, La Mia Vita Violenta was not the end point, it was a turning point. The band would go on to refine their sound, embracing subtlety, harmony, odd rhythms, and electronic textures. They didn't abandon noise, they learned to temper it and make it serve emotional truths rather than dominate them. That journey from distortion to dreaminess, from screaming to whispering, feels rooted in the struggle and the growth visible even in La Mia Vita Violenta. This is the moment Blonde Redhead begin to find themselves. It's messy, yes, filled with jagged riffs, screams, feedback that threatens to consume melody, but it's also achingly beautiful, carrying a romanticism that's only sharpened by its violence. It's the sound of three outsiders trying to make sense of each other and of their world, and discovering along the way that chaos and beauty are never really that far apart.